For the past 4 years, I've chosen to follow counsel and guidance that has led me into a dark delusion. My distorted version of reality went largely unchecked, as I would isolate from anyone who challenged me.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, those are the words of Ruby Franke, made about a month ago. She made this statement inside a Utah courtroom, and that was before a judge sentenced her. It is pretty interesting just how perfect and appropriate those words are, very eloquent, and one almost gets the idea that she knows exactly what to say. And so was she really, was her reality distorted when she was distorting everyone else's reality? And the thought occurs to you, if she was so good at getting an audience together on YouTube, was she doing the same thing here, telling the right story for the result that she wanted? Well, she was ultimately sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. Now think about that. A distorted version of reality and dark delusion seem like euphemisms for the cruel and sadistic punishment meted out to her own flesh and blood. One does have to question both the believer and a belief system that is capable of turning a person this evil. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit more detail. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, let me ask you, and this is where it really gets quite personal, I guess. Do you know anyone in your orbit who seems delusional? Do you know anyone who seems to be a victim of a distorted reality? I do. I know several people. I even know a dog walker who, and I'm not kidding, firmly believes the world is flat and that she's the one-eyed visionary in the Valley of the Blind. So how does that happen? How does someone become deluded? How do you develop a distorted version of reality? Now, as Frankie notes, we all have a tendency, when faced with challenges to our reality, to simply filter or block them out. This is a nasty side effect. And that side effect is that it intensifies the belief system, basically making it more extreme than it already was, more, I don't want to say sacrosanct, but basically immune to challenge. And so, whatever it is then allowed to run amok for long enough, as it did in Frankie's case. And then the only way to subdue it, it's almost like a sickness, a mental sickness, is apparently by force. For example, if you break the law and then law enforcement have to sort of deal with it. And this is why being curious, which is another word for being open-minded, and having a scout mindset and practicing critical thinking is so important. Now, if you think about it, what are we dealing with when you deal with a person with an extreme belief or a deluded belief, or someone who is perhaps unhinged in their beliefs, but basically there's a distorted version of reality? How do you deal with that? Or what do you call that? It's basically a dogmatic person, someone who stubbornly holds on to a particular view of the world in spite of criticism and in spite of, to some extent, reality. Of course, if you don't pay attention to reality, then that's your reality. But, reality is like gravity, and so given enough time, even the most deluded may eventually, grudgingly, find themselves in a place where they realize they were wrong. But it can take quite a long period of time. And that's where the question comes, at what cost? How much blood, sweat, and tears were shed in service to a counterfeit psychology? And probably a good analogy to this is being in love with someone. You're in love with someone, you sacrifice a lot, you pin your hopes on that person, you invest in that person, you put a lot of effort into the relationship, only to find out that person isn't who you thought they were. And then all of that time does sort of feel like it was wasted, doesn't it? So in the same way, if you think about a belief system as having a relationship with a person, but trying to remain open-minded, being curious about what is going on in their lives, positive and negative, and practicing critical thinking rather than a dogmatic approach where no matter what happens, you defend, right? You dig in, you defend your fortress, basically having a closed and defensive mindset. Well, that is how you're going to get into trouble, perhaps for a long period of time. Now, I think there's also the speculation against Franke's husband is quite reasonable. Was he really completely ignorant of everything? And I'm not sure what's worse. If he was ignorant, then just how distant and out of touch with his own children was he? That he didn't notice or didn't hear or didn't realize what was going on with them. Did he not know or did he not care? But even if he didn't know, then that is in a way an indictment in itself, because he must have been absent quite a lot. He couldn't have been present for vast stretches of time in order to not notice what was going on with them. Anyway, a case can also be made that if a village turns its back on individuals in its community, that is how these atrocities happen. Now, it's one thing if individuals turn their backs on a community. It's another thing if the community returns the favor, so to speak. And think about it, villages were once composed of nuclear families, fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, all looking out for one another. So one can rightly ask, where were they? Where was this nuclear family in terms of this family? And you might say they did notice things, okay, but why didn't they do more? Why were things allowed to reach such a terrible and toxic point that a child had to break out himself and essentially save himself? Because you've got to ask, if that didn't happen, what would have happened? A child had to break free and rely on the charity and kindness, not of other family members or a parent or a relative, but they had to, go randomly and rely on the kindness of strangers. And so one must question how two women in this case end up somehow leading themselves down the garden path. With Laurie Vallow, she seemed to get a giddy sense of power through her friend Melanie Gibb. When two friends get together and when there are no checks and balances, it seems the sky's the limit to people, to what people can think and do thoughtlessly. There's a Bible verse, Matthew 18 verse 20, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am among them. Well, that I may be God, but it may also be the devil. The question is how to tell which from which. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.